I am Mike Bursell. I am the co-chair of the OpenSSF Cyber Policy, Global Cyber Policy Working Group, which is as much fun as it says on the tin. We don't have quite as cool a name as ORC, but we're trying to do useful work. I'm also the exec director of the Confidential Computing Consortium, also part of the Linux Foundation. So what do we want to talk about? So just a very brief intro. Many of you know this already, but I kind of want to talk about this from a slightly different point of view. And I also want to have lots of questions and things, which means you'll all have to traipse over here, for which I apologize. If it's too far to traipse over there, you're unable to do so, then please raise your hand and I will repeat any questions and stuff you've got. So I thought we'd go with a classic who, what, why, when. We won't go with how. There's been a lot of stuff about how, including the last presentation. Thank you, Langley. But let's talk about this. So the first thing, when we're talking about the CRA, is to work out who you are. It sounds like a kind of weird thing to be worrying about. But there are three sets of things. When we're talking for the open source world, and I'm coming very much from the open source world here, there are three sets of folks who are kind of outside the actual EU. And these are the maintainers, or the manufacturers, who are the people who make the stuff, the open source stewards, and the maintainers. And so the first thing is a manufacturer is someone who makes products commercially available, makes them available in the market. We've already had some discussion about what those terms mean. But basically, if you are the person selling it, or you have an importer selling it or distributor selling it, that means that you are a manufacturer. And we'll see what that means in a bit. Let's skip to the last one at the bottom, which is, what is a maintainer? Well, a maintainer is basically what you'd expect a maintainer to be, which is someone who looks after one or more open source projects. And of course, many open source projects have many maintainers, or at least several maintainers. And they do what they've always done. There's nothing new there. And the problem that people realized when this is being worked out was that if you're a manufacturer and you take open source code and you discover, or someone discovers, a vulnerability in that open source code, let's say that Langley is the maintainer. I can go to the maintainer and say, there's this vulnerability. I need it fixed within 72 hours. And he will say, I'm going fishing. Or, well, you know, he has absolutely no reason to do that, because open source is like that, right? And so the concept of open source stewards was born. It's not perfect by any means, but they kind of act as a buffer between maintainers and projects and the manufacturers. And basically the idea is that it's a legal entity. So typically something like the Linux Foundation, or the Eclipse Foundation, or the Apache Foundation, or name your, one of your foundations here. And they have said that they will attempt to provide support for a specific open source project or projects, so that manufacturers can make it available for commercial use. So it's not just, we're going to do our best for this thing. We're going to make it do our best so that it can be used by manufacturers. Okay. So we'll come back to this a bit, but this is a really, really important distinction here, that these are people who say, we're going to do what we can and help, which means that when you're looking at your SBOMs, when you're looking at your vulnerability and incident management, you've got someone to talk to. Not saying you can force them to do things, but let's hope they're going to be a bit more responsive than Langley, who frankly is already getting on his boat and having a lovely time. What are you helping to catch, Langley? What are you hoping to catch? Decided what you hope to catch on your fishing trip? Oh, bass. Nice. Excellent. Okay, so let's get to the next thing. So what is this we're actually talking about here? So the key phrase, and it would be even more key if I'd remember to close the inverted commas, which is doing bad things for my OCD at this point, is projects with digital elements. So these are ones that are being sold in the EU, right? We only care about the EU. although frankly, you should be carrying more broadly, but for the purposes of this, we're talking about the European Union. Sadly, not the UK. Sorry to get political, but there we go. So this means hardware and software, because pretty much all hardware has some software, because microcode costs and counts, and so does firmware and all those sorts of things. And it's for businesses and consumers, although we care most about the consumers, and Mark Bohannon earlier on had a bit of a chat about that. And as we saw in our last talk by Landy, thank you, there are these various classes of what these types of products are. And the implications for what you have to do with those depends on what those classes are. So it's different, for instance, from HSM to a baby monitor. And baby monitors are actually called out pretty much explicitly in as are HSMs in the EU CRA. It's a very, very broad set of things. And as we discussed this morning, it was originally came from some questions about IoT and things like Mirai. Am I pronouncing that right? M-I-R-A-I. About people realizing that lots of devices, products with digital elements, could be used as jumping off platforms to do bad stuff to consumers. And the EU cares very much about its citizens, its consumers, and the intention was to try and do something about that. And they realized that actually it's not just baby monitors, it's not just webcams. It's pretty much anything out there that is going to have software in it, which can have vulnerabilities. I know, shocker. And therefore, which we need to worry about. Some very cynical laughter going on in the room when I say, I don't know what that's all about. And so, again, interesting question. What about services? What about SaaS stuff? And the answer, of course, as with anything, is it depends. Thank you. Yeah, you good audience. This is I'm getting some comeback here. So, the general rule of thumb, I think it's fair to say, I am not a lawyer. Well, that's sort of disclaimer. General rule of thumb is, if it is required by a physical PDA or an application or something that you're using to function correctly, and it's kind of integrated, then it counts. It's kind of pulled in. So if you've got a product with a digital element, which is just accessing a standard website and taking stuff from there, then it probably doesn't count. But on the other hand, if you've got a service on a web server which is providing an API which gives updates for a particular service that's being accessed by a phone or an app or by a nanny cam, then that probably does count and is pulled in wherever it is hosted in the world. Okay, just because it's hosted in the US or Canada or in the UK, that doesn't mean it's exempt, because it's basically part of the PDE, the product with digital elements. So not services, but it depends. I clearly was not having a good day because I failed to close some brackets here as well. I'm literally going to go back and fix this and send another copy because it's doing my head in. So there should be a bracket closed at the end. So some sectors already have existing legislation, and aviation, medicine, automotive, and that's not to say that the EU CRA doesn't apply, but as Krob says this morning, it's likely that the existing legislation takes precedent over that. And it is well, exactly. So it is, as Mark Bohannon points out, explicitly called out. So there are times when you don't need to worry so much because you should already be worrying, is what it comes down to. And of course, you all are. It's a very cynical crowd, this. I don't remember this moment. Maybe it's just me. So what's next? Why? Well, this is the reason. That is not a bracket. That is a smiley face, and that's fine. Maybe we can pretend that's the bracket from the previous one. Okay, fine. So people are taking pictures of this slide. You all know it's true, right? Cybersecurity is currently rubbish, except for all the companies for which you work, who do a perfect job, right? And so it's fine. Okay, well done. You got a big thumbs up at the back. Thank you. And as I said already, this is partly to reduce jumping off attacks. It starts partly to stop people chaining things. I don't know if any of you saw there was a talk yesterday by someone from NCO, was it NC? So was it NSO? Yeah, who talked about chaining, and this is exactly the thing they're trying to stop: is people chaining attacks and using one maybe low to medium vulnerability to escalate and do bad things. So we all know this is a problem, and this is what the EU got bored of and said, well, we're just going to stop it everywhere and fix it and everything will be perfect. Thank you. When we've talked a little bit about this as well, and the answer is pretty much everything by December 2027, but some stuff does come in a year earlier. On the vulnerability and incident stuff, again, as Langley mentioned a bit earlier, which means no, don't wait till then. Do it now, please, please, please do it now. Because if you're not doing it now, you're going to have problems. Because what this comes down to, and I believe this very strongly, is it's about processes. We need to do the processes and we need to do them now. Because vulnerability assessment and risk assessment is a process. It's not a one-off thing. Something you need to teach your teams, teach your company, teach your product managers, teach your engineers, teach your testers about, so it becomes part of what you do. And yes, places like Dell do this already, and they've been thinking about it for a long time, but we need to embed this into our practice. It should be what we're doing anyway. So this is my very short catch up of what it is. You've got manufacturers, stewards, and kind of it doesn't really apply to maintainers. There's not much you can do as the EU to tell people that they have to, if they're open source folks, they have to do particular things. It's products with digital elements, and look, I've failed to close that again. Why? Because cybersecurity is currently rubbish and fully enforced in December 27. So this is kind of how I see the three things that we need to be working on. Again, you guys know this already, right? You folks know this already. But the three things that I think are called out most by the EU CRA is risk assessment. And someone wisely said, I think, in the last one, that risk assessment is kind of core to everything about the EU CRA. Vulnerability and incident management. And we talk about supply chain a lot, but I'm an engineer, really, an application engineer. Sorry, they're my fault, those bugs. No one lets me write code anymore. It's fine. I'm an architect now. I just draw boxes. But it's about dependency management, right? Because if you don't understand all the dependencies in your chain, and if you can't list them, and if you can't track what their vulnerability and incident management is and what their risk assessments are, then it's going to be very difficult to do the other stuff. And, they are absolutely interconnected, and we have to think of them that way, and we have to create our processes to reflect that that is the case. And, hang on, I hope that most of you folks are thinking this already. Again, the cynical laughter is upsetting. So hopefully, yes, but maybe not as joined up as we'd like. And now, of course, you get added conformance testing. So we all love a good audit, right? Well, thank you. One person said, right. I have to admit that I was once an auditor. I worked for a year or so as an auditor, but I'm off it now. I didn't need it. I could give it up anytime I wanted. The power. No. So, but the EU is going to make you do this. And again, as we've seen in some of the other talks, the level of conformance testing, whether it's internal to your organization or external to organization, depends on mainly the class of product you're putting on the market, you're making available on the market. If it's an HSM, something like that, which is, or a firewall, because firewalls are perfect and fix everything. But if it's a product which is designed with security in mind as kind of the main measure, then that's likely to have the highest level of conformance requirements and require you basically to submit lots of information to one of the EU bodies. On the other hand, if it's something which is unlikely to have big security impact, then you should be able to do the conformance gathering yourself and submit that. And hopefully that will be sufficient. I'm unsure whether the EU has said they're going to do kind of spot checks, random checks on people of that. I don't know. That might turn up. I wouldn't be. Oh, Mark has a view on that. Yeah, this is the CE ecosystem. Yep. Okay. So let me just repeat that for people who didn't maybe catch it. Mark, who is a lawyer, but he's not our lawyer, points out that this is based on existing CE, which you'll, if you look on the back of lots of laptops or something, you'll see this little CE mark. It's based on that, and in fact, you will get a CE mark when you get conformance here. And exactly how that testing is carried out and what regimes are in place will depend to some extent on the different places that you're doing this, right? Different approaches. There will be spot checks and things. Okay, that kind of makes sense. One thing that's really important is that, one of the things you're going to be doing is putting in risk assessments. You're going to be putting in design documentation. You're going to be talking about, your vulnerability management. That is not stuff that is necessarily going to be shared with the public, which I was a bit concerned about when I first saw that you've got to submit this, but this is being submitted to these agencies, not made public. Now, if you want to make your risk assessment public, I think that's a very interesting and possibly brave thing to do. But on the other hand, also a great way to get people to think about how much they trust you and your products. So the next thing I want to do is to let you ask yourselves, which of these worlds do you inhabit? Who are you in this context? So this is my brief description of how to work out whether you're a maintainer, an open source steward, or a manufacturer. So basically, if you sell or otherwise make money from PDEs, products with digital elements, in the EU, then you are pretty much unequivocally a, come on, say it, a manufacturer. That's very good. Thank you. That may happen via an importer, via a distributor, but basically that's what you are. Okay. So if you provide some level of support for open source projects and you state that's what you can do, then you are probably an open source steward. Yes, you are a steward. Few of you are likely to be that, but we'll come back to that because I think it's really, really interesting. And if you do what you do now, which is open source stuff, then you're probably a maintainer. Okay. So what happens if you are a company which sells a product or service which is based on an open source project? Which are you? So there's a very question. Can you be both? And I think the answer is yes and no. It depends. So I think it's useful to think here about the distinction between a project and a product, right? A product is a supported version of something which may be an open source project, right? And so if you're putting a product out, then you are the manufacturer for that product. Now, you may also be the maintainer for that project, in which case you may also be a steward for that project if you decide that you want to take on that role. particularly if other organizations are using that project in their products. So you can kind of be both. And of course, you may have maintainers who you employ as well. The general legal understanding seems to be, although we're waiting for a definitive answer on this from the EU, that if you are a single person, a single project, a single maintainer, you cannot be a steward. It's a bit fuzzy, but we're waiting for definitive answer on that. But even if that is possible, you are only a steward if you say you want to be a steward and you are making a specific commitment to support that open source project for use within a PDE. Okay. And again, that's really important, is to provide that support. There's some really interesting questions about what if a steward decides they only want to support a project for certain fields of endeavor. So they only want to allow it for finance and leisure, for instance, rather than defense, which kind of breaks the standard open source model about you can use it for anything. But we'll come to that when we come to it. And I don't think anyone's, we have a question from the audience, yeah? So this is a great question. Are the open source stewards taking on any liability? It's like I've thought of the question before, isn't it? So conformance obligations are very specific and they're based on the type of PDE. There are some obligations on the open source stewards, but I think to say they have liability would be going too far. And the pushback that they can get and the penalties available to the EU, there seems to be very little there at all. Okay, so there's not much there. And in terms of the maintainers, they have no obligations. So what does this tell us? If you're a manufacturer and you consume open source projects, well, the first thing is, it tells us that you almost certainly want there to be a steward for that open source project, right? Because they're hopefully going to be providing support, right? But it tells us something else, which is that if you care about that project and you care about that level of support and the vulnerabilities being fixed and the incidents being reported, you are going to need to commit resources, human or money or other, to that steward and to that project so that you are happy that what you're consuming has a decent chance of being supportable. Because as there are few obligations on the steward, it is down to the community to make this stuff happen. My hope is that this provides a resurgence in people supporting open source projects. And as again, someone said earlier this today, realizing that as you, in the same way that you put aside maybe a certain percentage of your revenue or your profit to your IT team, that the same needs to be done for your open source commitments. Another question or comment from over there? Okay, so the question I think is there a financial incentive to support open source stewards as a manufacturer? What's to stop companies just providing a product to strip mine open source? And the answer is that, well, if you do that, well, are you just going to push it further down? Yeah, because they build on other open source projects as well. So I don't think it necessarily helps. And B, you can always fork, right? And people will fork and they will do that. And I think that the models that, I mean, we know that they're going to be, the foundations are going to take on stewardship, right? That works really well for them. And that, I think, is the most efficient economic way of supporting this with they've been the stewards, because it means that manufacturers can put in fractional parts of their work and get the efficiencies of scale and possibly efficiencies of scope by doing that. There is no liability indeed, but if someone's got to be helping that, right? Someone's got to be providing something that you can use. And if you can't push back on liability, the only thing you can do is resource. Let's carry on. We may have time for this later. We're running a bit low on time. So this is entirely, the economics of this are still being worked out. You are quite right. Okay? So what do I need to do? What I need to do is close some inverted commas and some brackets. But what do you need to do, right? Well, first of all, you need to decide what role you are. Are you a maintainer, an open source steward, a manufacturer, all three with different hats on? You need to get involved in the community. You need, at the very least, to understand what you're consuming and what impact that is going to have on what you're doing. You've got to work out what your obligations are and how you can actually meet those, and then put processes in place. Again, it is processes that you need to be working out. You also need to talk to your ecosystem. Work out what you want from them, how you can work together, and what the appropriate relationships you should have. And then when it's all done, you can sit back and feel smug, and you'll have nothing to worry about. And December 26 will come along, and 27, and everything will be fine. And Langley will still be fishing, so he'll be happy. Where can you get information? There's a few things here. If you want a better slide, please look at Krobe's talk this morning, which has loads more starting points. But here are a few things there, including some articles that I wrote for the OpenSSF about how you need to know about what's going on. And so here's the big question. Is it boring, scary, or exciting? And I spent literally minutes finding fonts which I felt were appropriate for that. I mean, I didn't go out and get fonts. They were already on my drop down, don't get me wrong, right? But I really thought about that. So I thought we could do a little, if you think it's boring, say, boring. Oh dear. Okay, what about scary? Say, scary. And exciting? Wow. You guys excited by the weirdest stuff in this room, I have to say. Well, we want to get to the stage where it's boring, right? Because once a technology or a regulation is boring, that means we've kind of got our heads around it. We're not there yet. And I would have said, I'm surprised there weren't more scaries, but I'm glad that you think it's exciting. Now, in my view, what we want to be doing is doing stuff we should be doing anyway, right? And that's what I think. We've kind of had discussions, we've gone along, which is fantastic. But we have time for one or two questions. Mr. Bohannon, start off. Where I defined which one? That one. It is not an accurate definition. It's a shorthand, and I do apologize. And okay, just to say that in case you want to miss it, important point. Thank you. Yes, you don't need to make or money necessarily. If you're marketing under your trademark, that can be sufficient to make you a manufacturer. Thank you. Question, gentleman there. Are there any definitions for how long you need to maintain a product? Yes, there are. I would point you back to Krobe's talk earlier on. Basically, it's 5 years. You need to provide free security updates for 5 years from the last substantial change to the product. And just trying to say we're only going to make it available for 3 years probably won't work. So yes, there you'll find loads of information. It's only about 91 pages of closely typed legalese. It's a great read. This gentleman here. Right. So the question is, are there going to be standards to help us with this? Yes. It's not already yet, bad luck. There are some things that you can do to help. And also you need to be aware that, there's standards for maintainers. So things like the OpenSSF security baseline is aimed to help at that, although it's not just standards. There are other standards. Enarx is doing stuff. There's a number of different ones that you should be. And if you're interested in that, please do get involved with things like the OpenSSF global cyber policy working group, of which I'm the co-chair. Would love to see you there. And I think one last one. Where does the liability come? Is it from consumers? It's not consumers. Consumers can complain, but it's the government, the EU, that will be and it's again, it's up to 2% or 2.5% of global turnover, depending on what it is. Yeah, it's very much like GDPR. Yeah. So I think we're done for time. I'm very happy to answer questions in the hallway or later on. Thank you for much your involvement. It's been lots of fun, and let's all go fishing. Thank you.